Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Jane Ali Knight. I'll be starting off with an introduction to sustainable development and what we mean by planning events sustainably. You'll also hear from Graham McCallum from HebCelt and Fiona Haggerty from Cryptic as case studies to bring to life some examples of best practice. We'll be presenting for the first 40 minutes and then have 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. We'll then facilitate informal breakout sessions for around 10 minutes so that you have the opportunity to do a little networking and discuss any ideas or learnings with your peers before briefly reporting back to the group. So, what is sustainability? So the most common definition of sustainability is one that came from the Brundtland Report in 1987. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So what we're going to be considering is what elements does the sustainability debate cover? Does it just cover the environment? Or if not, what else does it apply to? So I think this is a really interesting model which really highlights those three different spheres of sustainability. So obviously the one we're going to be really focusing on today is environmental, but also economic and social sustainability are also really key in any discussion of sustainability. And what's interesting here is we can also see where the different elements and spheres of sustainability overlap. So we obviously have economic and social, which would look at things like fair trade and workers' rights, which are obviously really critical for events. Environmental and economic, so looking at things like energy efficiency, subsidies, incentives for use of natural resources. And then finally, also that social environmental sphere. So thinking particularly about environmental justice and natural reward stewardship, both locally and globally. And these are really key issues for many festivals and events today. So, what do we mean when we talk about climate change? So climate change is looking at significant changes in global temperature. It's looking at weather, wind patterns and other measures of climate caused by humans. And in particularly, it's looking at CO2 emissions. And in particular, how we can reduce those CO2 emissions that are produced from our events. So obviously climate has no borders and there are certain climate change targets in place. These were agreed in 2015 by the Paris Agreement, where the focus was to try and reduce the rise in global temperatures to maintain a desired temperature below 2 degrees Celsius. Obviously, we also have targets now which focus more at net zero. And within the UK, the main target is to try and reduce CO2 by 45% by 2050. But here in Scotland, we've got more ambitious targets where we're looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2030 and 90% by 2040. So when we talk about biodiversity then, we're talking about all living things on Earth and their interaction. And obviously, again, lots of events are held in greenfield sites or the natural environment, and they do have an impact on biodiversity. So this is something we need to be aware of. And obviously, climate change and biodiversity are inextricably linked. So why are people focused on climate change and moving towards net zero? Well, there are various forces driving that rapid change and greening of all forms of tourism and events. One of the key forces is obviously the people attending events. So the attendees and the audiences are becoming increasingly aware of sustainability issues. They're more educated in terms of what are the key issues at events, and they want events to be visibly green and responsible. And often this will be a key factor in their choice of events that they attend. Obviously, local communities are hugely impacted by having events in their locality. Thousands of people coming and descending. And obviously we're going to see this during the summer here in Scotland. So Communities are really aware of the negative environmental impacts of events, and they want hosting an event in their community to be a positive, integrated, coherent experience. Another key force is obviously government agencies and public funders. So people like Visit Scotland and Event Scotland that provide permissions and funding for events to take place. They're also including stricter environmental requirements in the conditions they impose on organisers. And then finally, a lot of events are reliant on private and corporate sponsors. And again, these businesses are looking to ensure that the environmental aspects of their brand are protected by associating with only environmental responsible projects. And also in terms of their target markets, they're also trying to reach those more environmentally aware audiences. So what are the benefits then of delivering a sustainable event? Well, obviously, there are environmental benefits in terms of what we've discussed earlier, reducing the carbon footprint by reducing those CO2 emissions. Obviously, if you are looking at environmental benefits, a key one is waste. So events produce huge amounts of waste. And by looking at having effective waste management practices in place, that means that less of our waste goes to landfill, which is expensive, and more of it goes to recycling. And also we're reducing the negative impact on the environment, particularly the biodiversity. But what's really interesting, apart from the environmental benefits, is the social benefits. So we talked before about the local community. So we want to engage with the local community through using local suppliers at our events. We want to reinforce that sustainable development concept to our attendees. And also we want to use our events to educate attendees and our audience about how they can reduce their own environmental footprint, not just only at the event, but when they return home afterwards. But there are also clear business benefits. There are clear economic savings to be had by delivering sustainable events. Obviously, if we're using less energy, water and materials, that's going to save money and be cost efficient. We're also reducing risk and we're increasing staff morale. Hopefully, we're getting more engaged customers and we're increasing customer retention and loyalty. And also, it's a way for us to maintain competitive advantage in what is a very, very cluttered and competitive events landscape. So, how then do you hold a sustainable event? Well, the starting point is really to look at your carbon emissions and to try and calculate how much carbon your event produces. And there are lots of tools out there to actually help you do this. There's one example here, which is Business Energy Scotland. And if you click on that link, it will show you how to calculate your organisation's carbon footprint. So this is really the starting point for any event. And then you can actually measure year on year how you're reducing your carbon footprint. And then where are you looking at reducing across your event? Well, really, it's all the different aspects of your event. It's the venue, it's the catering, it's in the planning stages, it's having a good sustainability policy in place, it's looking at social well-being of both the audience and your staff, it's looking at transport. This is obviously a critical part of our CO2 emissions. And then also it's looking at that education and raising awareness, and then also having solid evaluation processes in place. And also there's the question of offsetting as well. You know, in order to achieve net zero or to reduce our carbon emissions, we might have to consider offsetting as well. And again, there are various tools and organisations out there that can help us with this. A lot of events will also offer that offsetting to their attendees in terms of things like looking at transport and offsetting the CO2 emissions from that. So what we need to do is we need to embed sustainability into all parts of our organisations. So starting with our vision and our mission. So what is the big picture vision that you have for your organisation in terms of sustainability? You know, are you moving towards net zero? Are you looking at waste minimisation? You know, you need to have a clear vision and also, you know, a mission to support that. You know, for example, we want to become a 100% locally sourced event, or maybe we want to become a vegetarian event, or maybe we want to try and minimise the use of power by looking at using alternative renewable sources like maybe wind. Uh, and then values, you know, what are your organisation's values? Is sustainability one of your core values, and how does your event embody and promote these values? Policies are really important. If you haven't got a sustainability policy, then this again is the starting point, along with looking at trying to calculate your CO2 emissions. There's lots of great examples out there. You know, even if you just look Google on the internet, you'll find some great sustainability policies. And what do you need to put in place? You know, how often do you need to review it and monitor it? And when does it need to be completed by? And then finally, what are the SMART objectives for your sustainability goals? So what are the key goals in terms of producing a more sustainable event? And those goals need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and obviously timed. So we need to look at developing from that sustainability policy some clear, achievable goals. And then this is just some examples of what we mean by putting that green knowledge into best practice. So these are just some best practice examples, and I'm sure our case studies will be giving some other great examples as well. But, you know, just looking around these key areas of your events and what are some practices that you can do to try and minimise the environmental impact of your event. So obviously lots of things around waste management. Transport is a key challenge for lots of events. So looking at trying to introduce more sustainable choices of transport are important. Staffing and management, having somebody within your staff that's really promoting what you're doing in terms of sustainability. Making sure that your staff are aware of these goals and that they buy into them. And then catering, again, is another big challenge for events. So yeah, looking at more plant-based options. Lots of festivals now are moving more towards sort of vegetarian and vegan options. Obviously having things like biodegradable cutlery. I know a lot of organisations use things like Vegiware. Reusable cups, which again can be another marketing thing for your events, and also obviously your suppliers, you know, looking at how sustainable your suppliers are and all down that value chain, making it as sustainable as possible. And then the other thing is communication. So, you know, you might be doing all these really great things for your event, but make sure that you communicate them. You communicate them to your audience, you communicate them to your funders, you communicate them to your sponsors. And obviously there are lots of ways you can do that through your website, through social media, through meetings with key stakeholders. So really shout out about all the great things that you're doing with regard to producing a sustainable event. So there's just some good examples of some things that you can do. And I'm sure a lot of things here you're doing already. So to summarise then, for festivals and events to be truly sustainable, we need to consider all those three pillars of sustainability. It's not just about the environment, it's also about the social and the economic impacts of your events. Positive change is being driven by those external pressures from the local community, from your audience, from performers and artists, and also from key funders. Obviously, we've got those key goals that are driving us as well in terms of both the UN and the national goals here within Scotland to look at reducing CO2 emissions. So start small, you know, be realistic, you know, focus on those incremental gains you can get. The first thing is having the baseline in terms of an understanding of how much CO2 emissions you're producing. And maybe it might be in your first year, you're just looking to reduce them by 20% or 25%. Have a policy in place and have some key objectives from that policy, again, which are realistic and achievable. So yeah, understanding that baseline and the starting point and the incremental gains that you can have. So thinking always about how you can minimize those negative impacts and maximize the positive impacts. So thank you. So hopefully that's given you a brief overview in terms of what we mean by sustainability, how it links to climate change and biodiversity, and some of the key sort of policies and practices that events and festivals can do. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move over to our first case study, which is a really interesting festival, HebCelt, and we're going to go to the director of the festival, Graham McCallum, to talk to us about some of the great practices that they're involved in with regards to sustainability.
So I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Graham. I'm the Deputy Festival Director for HebCelt. We are a 4-day music festival, music and arts festival, based in the Outer Hebrides. We have a capacity of 5,000 a day, and we programme a mixture of sort of traditional Gaelic and Scottish roots music, as well as a bit of a wider, more contemporary range. We've had people like Runrig, Van Morrison, Deacon Blue, Katie Tunstall, the Waterboys, people like that. So we are based in a pretty special place in the world, in Stornoway on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. You can see on the slide behind, I think the site right on the water. So the closest point of land to the Western Isles is 25 miles off the coast. So we're 25 miles off the coast of mainland Scotland. The Hebrides is 220 individual islands, and we're made up of over 60 sites of special scientific interest. And a lot of the water around the islands is maritime protected area. So if you pop us over, oh, sorry, I'll go, sorry. Yes, go on slide 2, why not? So that kind of ties into really why sustainability matters to us as an event. It was of key importance from the outset of the event back in 1996, but in particular since we started to grow the scale of the event and to attract a larger audience from off-island. Being situated in such a stunning, unique natural environment, it's incumbent upon us to hold our event in as sustainable a manner as possible, and to where we can educate our audience on the importances of these practices, and hope that they can take something back home with them when they leave us. You can see on the back of the slide here, this is a little trial project we had a few years ago with some of our volunteers running a recyclable sort of a recycling reward scheme, which went down really well on site. So one of the issues we have is sort of looking at balancing economic and environmental impact. So with over 50% of our audience travelling from off-island for the event, and also a large proportion of our artists travelling, that really is what makes up the majority of our environmental impact, is sort of carbon linked to travel. The easiest way perhaps for us to reduce the impact of this would be to reduce our travel, reduce the scope of the event, and scale back. However, it's incumbent upon us also to try and bring as much of an economic impact benefit to the island. We have in the past few years done various studies that looks to check what our economic impact is, and annually we bring in just over £2 million in economic benefit to the local area. Some of the biggest some of the biggest challenges that we have are often resistance to change, and those of you who run events in the local community will maybe have felt this before. When we try and make changes to how we've done things in the past, there's a bit of resistance, perhaps with local people not understanding why we're doing things that we're doing. And for this, we find that communication is really key. So if we could hop over to slide 3. So one of the main things that we've done very successfully in the past, which aids our communication, is develop one of our volunteer teams, who we call the Green Team. They're perhaps looked upon by lots of people as just general litter pickers, but they're so much more than that. They're tasked with championing our sustainability messaging to audiences, educating on various issues, but mainly where and how to dispose of waste correctly across the site. They also break down and sort through all waste streams to ensure compliance. So the Green Team themselves, since we brought them in the early 2000s, have helped us reduce our waste to landfill by over 80% through their continued engagement and the work that they do to communicate initiatives with our audience. And through this, we've been able to maintain a really low waste to landfill ratio as we've grown the scale and size of the event. Also pictured in back here, you'll see our reusable drinks cups. So back in the mid-noughties, we phased out disposable plastic cups. We replaced them with cornstarch cups in 2014, but given some issues that we had on island with the disposal of these cups, we moved to a reusable solution on site, which has vastly reduced not only our waste to landfill, but our recycling waste and our waste from that point of view as well. So the scheme provides a really accessible talking point as well for the Green Team and for everyone as they interact with the cups on site. It's allowed us to put certain messages and branding as we change the cups as well. So that's been hugely successful and something that we're really quite proud of. Further to that, and sort of building on it, we in 2018 we decided to put in place a ban on all single-use plastics, especially on the audience side of the event. We'd already been meeting the standard across several aspects of the event production, with our vendors using biodegradable cutlery and packaging. However, single-use water bottles and other bits and pieces were still in place. So off the back of the UK government banning plastic straws, we decided to try and push one step further and ban all single-use plastics. So we replaced everything with, where possible, with drinks cans, and water was brought onto site via standpipes, which could be refilled into the eco cups that you see behind, but also into aluminium reusable water bottles, which we had for sale. We also used those backstage for our artists. And that was one of the sticking points, was how to get artists water on stage without using plastic. Since then, things like cans, canned water and Tetra Pak water has become available, but it wasn't too easy to find back when we did it. Also, rather contentiously, we decided to outlaw the use of lanyards on site, which was a bit of an issue with some of our volunteer teams, and that kind of ties into the resistance to change that I was talking about previously. So in amongst all this, over the last few years, we've been dealing with a company called A Greener Festival, who are really championing festivals sustainability across the industry. In 2014, we received a nomination and recognition for our steps to continually improve our sustainability. And then in 2017, again, we were actually awarded the highly commended award as recognition of everything that we were doing. It's something that I'd highly recommend is involvement with award schemes like this across your industry, if that's events or more widely. It provides a really good benchmark to look at what you're doing, identify gaps, and how you can continue to improve. Also, sorry, my computer's freezing up here. I'm really sorry. So our sustainability messaging. So that's another sort of success story that we've had over the years, is how we communicate with our audience. That ties back into what we do with the Green Team, but more widely, use of our communications channels across our website, which helps give ownership to our audience of what we do on site and around the festival in both environmental sustainability, but also more social and economical areas as well. So we could pop over to slide 4. This is where we come to looking at what we're doing in the future. For this year, we've been lucky enough to work with a company called Plus Zero, who are we're working with to replace our diesel generator on site. So we have a 16 kilowatt diesel generator, which we're replacing with a green hydrogen system this year, which will produce the power for our second stage, the bars, and a number of our catering units on site. And we believe that this is a first for a UK festival of our size and scale. We're also replacing the lighting around our site with a hydrogen power system as well. I'm really, really sorry, my computer's completely frozen and all my notes have disappeared, so I'm somewhat doing this off the cuff. I really, really apologise. So the challenges now and in the future. So challenges that we have, that I'm sure a lot of you have, is perhaps that sustainable options aren't necessarily the most cost effective. We've seen that recently with the government change in taxes on green fuels, and certainly what we're doing this year with our hydrogen project wouldn't be possible without funding. It's substantially more expensive than a diesel equivalent, but we believe that it's really important to look at ways that we can build on new and existing technologies and hope that in the future they become sort of more sustainable and easier access for the likes of yourselves. So I think at this point, given that I'm having technical issues, which again, I'm really sorry about, I'll wrap up, but really happy to dive into anything in the Q&A afterwards. That's probably where you'll get more information out of me.
Hi there, my name is Fiona Haggerty and I'm project manager for Cryptic. I'll quickly just tell you a little bit about Cryptic. We're an arts producer based at the CCA in Glasgow, founded by Cathy Boyd in 1994. Just the next slide over tells you a little bit more about Cryptic. We run various programs that nurture and support artists, as well as a biennial audiovisual festival at 10 venues across Glasgow. So just quickly as well, in terms of environmental sustainability, we have been a member of the Green Arts Initiative since 2014, and from then on we've worked really hard to try and embed environmental sustainability into our programming and draw attention to the climate emergency through the works that we programme. We work with Creative Carbon Scotland to report on all of our carbon emissions. We have a carbon management plan, working towards the goal of net zero emissions in line with Scottish Government guidance by 2045, which is a real challenge for an international festival, but it's great to be able to have tools to be able to start planning for that, so that we can make strategic decisions towards lowering our emissions when organising events. So I'm going to talk about a project that we ran last summer called Signal on Sea, which is a good example of a project where we did use quite specific tools to be able to plan around environmental sustainability, so that we can really start to be more mindful about how we're working. So I'll quickly tell you about the project Signal on Sea. It was a large-scale sound installation on Irvine Beach that we ran last July, with 12 poles placed across the beach. And it was supported by Event Scotland's Year of Coast and Waters Fund. So for the project, and this was the first time we had ever done this for a project, and we hope to embed this in our planning in the future, we put together a simple environmental action plan and overall policy. We really wanted to be more intentional about how we worked, and we wanted to be able to plan and have a lead into that, and to be able to get the full team on board, from technicians to front of house to the office team. Everyone had a role to play in the plan and were aware of it beforehand. For the action plan, we used key sustainable event management guides, including Zero Waste Scotland's Litter Prevention Checklist, Resource Efficient Scotland's Event Sustainability Guide as well as guidance from Event Scotland. And all of these guides are readily available online. So some of the points that the action plan included, which is on the next slide over, we looked at where our potential environmental impacts would be and how we can mitigate them, mainly around waste, litter and carbon emissions. And some of the easy things to do, and that everyone, when planning an event, can look at in terms of lowering their carbon emissions, was we encouraged audience to travel or use public transport to travel to the event or walk. We made this really simple by having this sort of messaging really clearly available on our website, so people didn't have to go and find this information. What were the main bus routes to Irvine Beach from the Central Belt, trains as well, but also locally. And we included this information on our social media pages as well. And we also ensured that the publicity campaign had a really strong local focus, so that the event was for locals as well, embedding that into the community as well. But also it's minimising those emissions from further fields. Also, other things to do is when organising travel for artists and speakers and performers is to book low carbon options if possible, which again really requires a long lead into planning, so that you can allow for those extra days it might take for travel. A lot of artists now and performers and speakers are really invested in this sort of way of travelling. So for the artists, the two Dutch artists that came over to deliver Signal, they both travelled over on ferry. And they also took their work with them on the ferry in a van. So this reduced kind of international freighting charges that we may incur. So it's a more kind of economically sustainability for us as an organisation. And also we're lowering the emissions by not having artists travelling plus individual international freight travelling as well. And being able to lower those costs is a real incentive to be able to work more environmentally sustainable in this way. So that's a really key point to include in planning if possible. Other really simple things were virtual meetings where possible, which of course during the time of COVID when we were delivering Signal was very easy to achieve, but still, you know, is asking yourself those questions. Do we need to travel to an event, or can we organise this more digitally and maybe meet later on once plans are further developed, as of course those face-to-face are still important. We use digital programs to reduce paper and littering on sites. There were lots of QR codes available. Again, people are now really familiar with this sort of way of learning about work using QR codes. So that's a real plus that's come out of everything around COVID, is that we have been able to reduce our paper waste emissions. And it also saves on cost as well, again, which is key. So reducing that print run is a real saving too. Another thing that we did was we engaged the community through sustainability. So we organised a litter pick on the last day of the installation with the urban cleanup crew, which was great to be able to engage a local group and get volunteers down to the beach that maybe wouldn't have seen the work. So we had 42 volunteers that joined for the beach cleanup, and we picked up 46 bags of rubbish. And so, yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of look and find what groups are already in existence in where you're working, or if you're working locally, find groups that are already doing the thing that you would want to do and engage them. And also that means you get a different sort of audience coming to see the event or the work as well. Another thing that we put into our plan was recycling of the materials of the poles. We made sure that the Signal was on kind of long poles with speakers on top, and we had to have those made specifically for the project. We made sure that was done in Scotland, again reducing travel and freighting costs for those. And we also made a commitment to recycle them, and so we're really happy actually that the Norfolk and Norwich Festival based in Great Yarmouth actually took Signal and showed it last month, and they used our poles, and so we saved another festival, another arts organisation, the cost of having to produce those, and we saved those from having to go to landfill. So that was a real positive for us, and it's something that we will continue to do with materials in the future. Another key thing as well was working with local suppliers and businesses. We didn't hire in anything that, like portaloos or food trucks. We built relationships with the local community, like Coastwatch Scotland, who were based on the beach, and we were able to use their facilities. So again, it's another great way to be invested in community, but also reduce on admissions and on costs as well. And one of the key things that we did for Signal, and that I would really, really recommend, is making a commitment. So a commitment towards reduce environmental sustainability. So for Signal, we undertook Zero Waste Scotland Resource Efficiency Pledge, bronze level. And so to achieve this, we submitted all of the work that we did around the action plan and the policy and the beach cleanup and all of the documentation around that. And that enabled us to achieve the bronze award. Making this sort of commitment and working with an external organisation who are there to be able to offer you guidance and advice is really, really beneficial, especially when you're beginning this sort of work. It holds you accountable as an organisation. It means that you have to deliver, and it really sort of, for us, it kind of really helped us to begin to be able to work more intentionally around environmental sustainability and to be able to embed that in our future programming. So I think that's, you know, for a conclusion, I think that is kind of one of the key takeaways I would suggest, is making that sort of commitment, putting together a policy, getting the whole team on board, being able to think about the impacts that you may have well in advance of your event, and think about how to mitigate those things up around really simple things around waste emissions and your carbon imprint as well. And I guess the challenges around these things are, you know, important to bear in mind too when planning. Of course, this takes more time, and it also takes one person in the team to be able to have to champion this, which is a little bit slower at first. And then when this becomes embedded in your organisation, it's something that won't take as much time, so it's absolutely worth doing. Yeah, so ultimately I think, you know, those are the key takeaways I would suggest, is making the commitment and having that action plan.
Okay, so yeah, thank you, Fiona. I think some great insights there, and some really good practical examples and some quick wins for people. So now it's really over to you. So if people want to put on their videos again so we can see people, that's great. So it's time for questions. I've noticed there's a few questions coming into the chat, so I can take those. And then also, if anyone's got any questions they'd like to ask, and they want to put up their hand or use the emoji, I'll have a look as well and make sure to capture those questions as well. So we've got a couple of good questions that are coming through the chat. So yeah, a few questions around sort of environmental policies and plans and whether we can share those. I'm sure that we will be able to do that afterwards, and I know we will be giving you a list of resources after the seminar. So a question for you, Fiona. You know, so and I suppose also for Graham, so we'll start with Fiona. How do you negotiate sustainable measures which have accessibility implications? So, for example, using a digital program might be more sustainable, but they're not necessarily accessible to all audience. So, I suppose that challenge between, you know, balancing sustainability with accessibility.
Yes, yeah, definitely, and it's a challenge and something that, yeah, we always have to consider. I mean, I think specifically for a project like Signal, it is having like, and for any sort of exhibition that we might do or installation that we might do, we do avoid like printing, but maybe you have like a large print or whatever it is, you know, a laminated, you maybe have like one or two on site, and you just have front of house briefed as well. I mean, we often do use front of house, and we, you know, try and engage them as much as possible to go and talk to people too, and try and understand what their needs are, or make themselves, you know, visibly available so that people can go and talk to them, because obviously they can't immediately look at the digital brochure. So there are ways around things like that, but I think it's an ongoing challenge for each event and it's different for each one.
Brilliant, thank you. Graham, anything to add?
Nothing much to add, really. That was absolutely spot on. We work with our volunteer teams on site for that sort of thing. We have the ambassador team who are on hand to verbally communicate anything that might be required. I think one of the key things is sort of pre-show communication and making yourself easily available through various points of access. And as always, we're always looking to take on information from people, grow and change how we present ourselves and make ourselves accessible.
Brilliant, thank you. Fiona, another question for you. So did you select Irvine because you could run the event sustainably, or was it the other way around? And obviously, you know, it can be a tricky balance with making things for communities that are underserved, but also the issue of sort of, you know, access in terms of transport, etc., to the location.
I mean, we picked Irvine because we wanted to work in Ayrshire and we wanted to bring a project to the beach, and we wanted loads of people to see it, and we wanted people not to have to travel to Glasgow and Edinburgh to see it. So I guess, I mean, that was the key driver, and it was about, you know, sustainability in terms of social sustainability and working with local businesses and bringing something, you know, different to the beach as well. And also, you know, with Irvine Beach, it's a hugely busy location, especially in July when it was like the hottest time I've known Scotland ever to experience. So many people saw the project, and for us that was really what it was about.
And how was it received by the local residents and the local community?
I think really, really well. I think people really enjoyed it. They felt like it was something a bit different, and it was different at all times of the day. Sometimes the beach was so busy that like the score was kind of drowned out, but you know, it was, yeah, I think it went down really well.
Brilliant. So we have got probably 10 minutes for questions, so please keep those questions coming in the chat. Let's go to you, Graham. So we're talking here about carbon footprint. So can you tell us in terms of anything that you're doing in terms of measurement for the festival, in terms of trying to capture the sort of CO2 emissions?
Certainly. So we use the tools on Julie's Bicycle for calculating our carbon footprint. That feeds in all of our sort of power usage, water usage, all sorts of things like that. Ties it all in together. Your transport, miles covered, what kind of fuels you're using, energy usage on site, and it presents it all in a really easy, simple system that you input all of your metrics and details into, and then that crunches the numbers, which is the daunting and sort of scary thing, I think, for a lot of us trying to negotiate our way around things like this. But the tools on Julie's Bicycle are excellent. So if you're looking for something, they're really, really good.
Brilliant, thank you. And Fiona, what are you doing in terms of sort of CO2 emissions and measurement?
So because we're a regularly funded organisation, Creative Scotland, we work with Creative Carbon Scotland really closely and have the carbon management plan that we have we update every year, and so we submit a survey every year on all of our emissions, and we use a website called Claim Expenses, which is run through Creative Carbon Scotland to measure all of that. And we make targets as well for reduction of especially international travel, which is a real challenge. But yes, we measure absolutely everything.
And then I just wanted to ask you in terms of, what's the primary motivation, for the sustainable practices within the organisation? What's the sort of, driving force behind that? So Graham, maybe if we go to you first in terms of what's the sort of primary motivation there?
I think, to be perfectly honest with you, I think the primary motivation is behind me right now, in my picture there, it really comes from where we're situated in the world, and our feeling of sort of moral responsibility to do everything we can to limit our impact as the biggest, the largest sort of cultural event that takes place in the Outer Hebrides. It's also a great opportunity to encourage it amongst our local community, but also those who visit, make sure that they're doing so sustainably.
Should I answer on behalf of Cryptic? Yeah. I think a big motivator for us is kind of maybe behavioural change with our audiences. I mean, we work with a lot of artists that are really dedicated to highlighting the climate emergency, and we've done some big projects below the blanket as well. In Edinburgh at the Botanic Gardens too, was all around the impact that the climate emergency is having up north on the Flow Country. So I think for us, it's you know, being part of progressing things if we possibly can, and helping share that message maybe in a different way, in a kind of more creative way, something that people can discover maybe in a less scary way or negative way, I think. But I think as a cultural organisation, we want to be working at the forefront of environmental sustainability in general, because that's just the way that the world is going. And there is the funder element as well. We have to work in this way quite often. If you're a publicly funded organisation, like realistically, where that is the case. So it's kind of the way that everything's progressing. So more and more, I think, we'll be asked. We have to report on all of our emissions. We have to be held accountable at each year. So I think that will only continue and maybe become more detailed.
Hi everyone, I'm just jumping in, I think, because Jane is still experiencing a fire alarm at the moment. So I think the next question we had, I think, was about Julie's bicycle tool. I think maybe Graham, if you're able to talk a little bit about using that tool.
Yeah, certainly. I think that it was to do with the cost, and I believe it is free. I've certainly never paid for it. But we've been signed up for a very, very long time. But I believe it is a free resource. I dropped the website details in the chat there if anyone's interested in it. It's their Creative Green Tools section that you want to click through to. But yeah, it's a really useful. It keeps everything nice and simple and on an easy to understand level. And we first started, we sort of used it initially before we actually submitted anything. We used it the year before just to look at what information it needed and required to give you the most realistic carbon measure. And then since then, I think about 2014, I think we've been using it and reporting back.
That's great, Graham. Does anyone else have any questions? If you want to pop them into the chat, I'm just checking as well.
I noticed one earlier about lanyards. I'd mentioned that we'd stopped using lanyards because we couldn't find a sustainable sort of a sustainable option. Even the more sustainable ones, the sort of your recycled materials aren't necessarily recyclable, and even the ones that feature sort of bamboo material, they still have elements of plastic on them. So we decided to move away completely from it. Also, given the weather where we were always laminating rather than just using card. Stuff needs to be waterproof. So we've just moved completely to a wristband system on site, and we use bamboo biodegradable wristbands. And there's very few, but there are some groups such as folk from the ambulance service and others who can't wear wristbands. So we have a sticker system in place. And we get sheets of biodegradable, sustainably sourced stickers, which we print up where possible with sustainably sourced inks, but again, those are really troublesome sometimes to come across. But there's maybe a dozen sort of touch points amongst people on site that actually need that.
Brilliant, thanks, Graham. One question for both you and Fiona, I think, is just what support do you need to be more sustainable? Maybe move over to Fiona first, and then we'll ask Graham to answer that question.
Oh, more time. Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge for a really small organization, and I guess to be more sustainable, you need one person to really champion it, but you also need the full team to be on board. So it's almost a full-time job in itself to have that input. It's time and money, I suppose, realistically. I think there is a lot of support available. There's a huge amount of resources, almost sometimes too many. Like there's so many things that you can look at, and there's so many people you can talk to, like Creative Carbon Scotland and Zero Waste Scotland. So I think that's really there. Those conversations are there. But I think it is just about, and I think with the action plan, we really learned that you have to start early and you have to make it a key part of your planning. Because as I said, I think often these things can be an afterthought, but it is about getting that team investment as well, I think.
What about you, Graham?
I just echo everything Fiona said. Absolutely. Time and money. We have appointed one of our board directors as the sustainability lead for the organisation, but given that they're in a volunteer position and also have a full-time job, basically you could, as you said, employ someone, I think, on a full-time basis within even a very small organisation whose role it is to keep on top of the vast amount of information that is out there and try and sort of simplify it and communicate it to the team. That's the real. It can be very, very daunting to try and get a handle on where you are and what you can do, just because of the sheer amount of information that's out there. But there's lots of great tools, and I'm happy to speak to people on a one-to-one if needs be as well.
Thanks, Graham. I think the last question to wrap things up is what are your future aspirations for your event and sustainability?
I think future aspirations are probably around Sonica, our international festival. How do we deliver that sustainably? How do we reduce the impact of international travel? Can we build in time for train travel? Can we ask artists for more of their time to be able to do that? And a lot of artists are actually coming to us and saying, can I travel by train? We've encouraging artists to stay longer. When they're in Glasgow as well, working with other festivals to coordinate meetings with them as well, so they're making that trip really beneficial. So I think it's actually with the next edition of an international festival, how can you start planning really early and actually measure the impact? I think that's one of the challenges as well, is actually measuring. When I talk about encouraging audiences to come, you can't measure whether that's happened. So yes, I think it's kind of proving at the end that you've managed to actually deliver a more sustainable event is a challenge.
What about you, Graham?
Again, as Fiona just keeps hitting it out of the park with her answers. Really, yeah, it's about sort of building on sustainability as we build in size and scale of the event. What we're doing this year with the hydrogen program is something that we're really hoping to build on for the future. The possibility of actually being able to run the event purely on green produced hydrogen from the island. Someone asked about it in the chat just a moment ago, so I've dropped the details of the company that we're working with, but they actually produce hydrogen on the island through green electricity, which is produced by on and offshore wind energy. And having that generator on site this year, it's a bit of a test project for ourselves, obviously, but it'll replace our secondary power source. We're plugged into the grid which we work with our energy supplier to provide green energy from the same source as the hydrogen plant itself. So it's a mixture of on and offshore wind, but being able to build on that and use the green hydrogen for our ancillary power, that'll be huge. But then over and above that really is looking at travel. As you know, we're an island event. Everything in terms of infrastructure and half of our audience come from off the island. So it's about working with our the likes of Calmac as to how we can build on that. And that's something that we hope the hydrogen project will kind of feed into. They've already commissioned, I think, 2 hydrogen-powered or sort of hybrid hydrogen-powered ferries. So I think the dream is one day being able to bring our audience and our artists over under green power, which would be huge.